When you think of movie trilogies, one thread that they all seem to have is that they all come from huge blockbuster franchises or had pre-existing fan bases. So the Dark Knight trilogy, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, hell, The Hobbit got extended into a trilogy, even with more content that was more romantically inclined, so like the Twilight movies, for example. Those had a couple of things going for it, the first of which is that there was already a huge fan base that came from the books. You don't typically think of indie movies or indie dramas having trilogies. All of this is to introduce the movies I'm going to be talking about today. Richard Linklater's Before Trilogy, one of the best love stories in cinema. Hi, I'm Matt Kime, and welcome back to Full Stop Reviews. Hi guys, welcome back to Full Stop Reviews. Welcome back to my channel.
The hell, Matt?
Hey, Matt.
Oh, your channel. Oh, okay.
You selfish fuck.
Nah, not like all of us have been fucking putting a bunch of effort into this thing.
It's ours! Alright, I get it!
Give us a like, comment, subscribe. If you want to argue about movies with me, I'm here all day because I don't have a life. And I want to thank you all for having a little bit of patience with us. I was going to have a review of the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once coming out this past month. Certain life events kind of screwed up my production schedule. Shout out to the state of Maryland. You know what you did. And as a result, I decided to kind of table review for that movie. Green light, by the way, if you really must know what I thought about it. Just because, like, everybody else has talked about it already, and I don't really think I had that much to say that hadn't already been said about that movie. And so I decided to pivot and go back to something I did last year, where I take a look at a couple of movies from the Criterion Collection, a film organization that is dedicated to preservation of films from around the world. Last year it was Come and See, Pan's Labyrinth, and The Great Escape, and I decided to do something a little bit less traumatizing this year. I'm not sponsored by Criterion, oh by the way, but if they want to give me money. So the movies I'm talking about today, as you may have sensed in my preamble, are Richard Linklater's Before Trilogies, Before Sunrise from 1995, Before Sunset from 2004, and Before Midnight from 2013. These are some of the best romantic movies ever put to screen. I'm going to do a bit of a breakdown on how and why I think these movies are so effective, and why this trilogy is thematically more poignant than most love stories we see. And that each movie has kind of something different to say about love, but the way that these three films are kind of woven together creates a deeper experience as you live through this story with these characters. So let's get into it. Richard Linklater is an American film director who is known for doing kind of slice-of-life style movies. His first movie, It's Impossible to Learn to Plow by Reading Books from 1988, just follows a singular protagonist walking around and kind of just interacting with people and the environment around him. The movie doesn't go too much more in depth than that. These movies aren't very plot-based. A lot of times you're just spending time with these characters, or as others have called it, the hangout movie. The best example of this is probably Dazed and Confused, which you might know for this reason.
All right.
You're with characters during various moments in their lives. Boyhood's another example of this, and Boyhood is probably the closest analog to these movies that I'm about to analyze, just in the sense that you're following the same cast as they get older. And that's the unique thing about Boyhood, is that he casted a family and took several years shooting that movie, with the intention of showing these people as they were legitimately growing older, as the actors themselves were getting older and having different life experiences, with the hopes that their life experience would inform the story as it unfolds. And so something very, very similar gets achieved here. A lot of that same energy gets brought to these movies, where you're kind of just spending time with these characters, sometimes just doing mundane things like drinking coffee. Sometimes they're declaring their love for each other, but a lot of times they're just talking about inane philosophical theories that they immediately change their minds on. But the filmmaking techniques themselves are very, very stripped back and very, very minimalistic, and this is done with the intention of kind of putting the characters and the actors first and foremost and letting them carry the story. In fact, it's so naturalistic the way that it's presented, you would almost swear that the dialogue is almost completely improvised, even though it's really not. Following the train of real life informing the story being told, first film in the series was inspired by a real event. In 1989, while he was living in Philadelphia, Linklater met and connected really quickly with a woman named Amy, and they shared a night together, going out exploring the city, just enjoying each other's company. And that was really their only substantial time together. Reportedly, they tried to stay in touch through phones and letter writing, and it just kind of fizzled out after a while, and they never saw each other again after that night. But the memory of that night was so strong and so left such an impression on Linklater. He wrote a film about the magic of young love and falling in love for the first time, and that is what Before Sunrise was. Oh, by the way, I'm gonna spoil the fucking shit out of these movies just so I can properly analyze them. So if that bothers you, this might not be the video for you. These movies are very, very much worth investing your time into. Green lights for all three of them. Before Sunrise is the story of Jesse, a young American college student traveling through Europe following a breakup. On his last day in Europe, he's on a train moving its way through Vienna, Austria, where he connects with Celine, a French college student. The two of them get to talking, and then when they realize they kind of like each other, they decide to get off the train and spend the day and the rest of the night in Austria. And as the film progresses, their connection grows deeper and deeper. And despite the fact they are very clearly falling for each other, there's this cloud hanging over them throughout the entire film of the knowledge that his flight back to America leaves that next morning. So they really only have that night together. So they decide to just make the best night that they can out of it, and then deal with the rest in the morning. As they're at the train station saying goodbye to each other, they make a pact not to call or write each other, but to meet up in that same spot exactly 6 months from the end of that film. And the film ends with one on a train and one on a plane going in opposite directions, and you are forever left to wonder what happened after the end of the film. Or at least you would have had there not been the existence of two sequels. So this movie, once again, based on the real-life experience from Linklater, he and frequent collaborator Kim Krizan decided to write a script about it. Throughout the casting process, they settled on Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy for the parts of Jesse and Celine, respectively, and they almost talked themselves out of it because they were worried that the characters might be a little too old. And part of what they're going for is kind of the magic of young love and falling in love for the first time, and how the whole thing just kind of feels like a dream, a fantasy. You're not even sure if it's real or if it's just a dream you're gonna wake up from. And the movie plays with this idea in a lot of ways. And so the most important thing for a movie like this is that you have to buy the connection between the characters. Because if you don't buy this connection, there's not going to be any tension, there's not going to be any conflict, and you're just going to be bored watching people talk to each other for an hour and a half. But this film is very, very meticulously written, very meticulously crafted, and you would never realize that just because of how casual and minimalistic the presentation is. So let's talk about the cinematography for a little bit. In the case of all three of these movies, the cinematography is very minimal. A lot of times you're introduced to a location through a wide shot, and then the only things you get beyond that are simple shot, reverse shot. Sometimes you'll get a close-up trying to emphasize specific emotional moments, but for the most part, it's just shot, reverse shot. It's very simple. It's almost like watching a play in a lot of ways. Another technique that gets used are long tracking shots where characters are just walking through the streets of Vienna and you're just following with them, or they're on a streetcar, or in the case of Before Sunset, you're in the back of a cab or something, and you have tracking shots that can sometimes take as long as 11 minutes in the case of Before Sunset, but you don't even quite realize how much time has passed until you look back and you think, oh wait, we haven't had a cut in a while. And so the editing and the cinematography are both very minimalistic because they just want to put the focus on the characters. And this is a very smart thing to do, because one of the little psychological effects of having just this shot, reverse shot, despite the fact that we're in some of these fantastic locations that many Americans don't get to go to, like Vienna, Austria, and is that it emphasizes the characters' focus on only each other. They don't even see anything else going around outside of them. They only are focused on what the other person is saying. And so it builds the connection you see on screen, and it kind of builds your investment in that connection, and it helps you buy it a little bit more. Because one of the dangers of this, almost like this true love at first sight type of film, it's a concept that kind of has gotten abused by romantic films, especially in the 90s, where you have films ending like this. Or this.
Nice, huh?
Or this, or even in serious romantic films like Titanic, you're still following kind of a basic formula as far as the love story goes, where girl X is with guy Y, guy B swoops in at the end of the day to save the day. These films try to avoid too many grand plot designs. Instead, this film is kind of presented as a dream. The fact that most of it is set at night kind of emphasizes that. A lot of the lighting choices that they use kind of help emphasize the dreaminess of this first movie. The most intimate scene in the film is where they're lying in the park after drinking a bottle of wine, and it's just this beautiful, soft, diffused lighting that kind of puts a haze on everything. To give a quick breakdown of lighting, soft lighting is basically used to emphasize lighter moments or more intimate moments in films. You'll see this a lot in old school filmmaking, like Golden Age of Hollywood style filmmaking, where the leading actress is lit with very, very heavily diffused lighting to kind of emphasize their beauty. And so you have soft lighting kind of setting the mood. You also have lots of bokeh. Now, if you don't know what bokeh is, this is bokeh. It's pretty. Makes things look pretty. Another angle that this movie takes to kind of focus the characters kind of only on each other is the fact that they're both foreigners to this country. Now, granted, one's in the EU, and so is a little bit more, I guess, native European, but neither of them speak the native language in Austria, which is German, and neither of them know their way around town. They're both strangers. They're the only two characters with names we meet in this first film, and this goes for Before Sunset too. This has kind of the effect of just bonding these two characters together, in that neither of them know the language, neither of them know the city, and so they're both kind of immediately bonded from just being on this journey together. Again, a film like this really has to sell the connection between the two characters, and so this film pulls out all the stops to make that happen. But they also have essentially this dream date. They drink wine in a park, they have dinner on a boat, they go onto a Ferris wheel, they explore a neat and very old and very architecturally fascinating city. They meet various artist types. She has her fortune read to her from a palm reader at one point. They run into a poet. They see musicians. They see a lot of unique and very, very, almost like a bohemian style, like artsy style subculture to Vienna. And you're kind of along for this ride. And you're seeing all these strange and very interesting characters. At the end of the film, you see almost a Woody Allen-style montage of all the locations they went to, except this time it's during the day. The light is more naturalistic, the shadows and colors are more muted, the shadows are darker, and the light of day kind of, at the end of the film, signifies that the time is up. So there's a scene very early on in the film where the two of them are hanging out at a record shop, and they decide they want to check out one of the albums, and they go into a listening booth. And there's only one shot in this listening booth scene, but I think it's one of the most effective scenes in the movie. I'll play for a little excerpt for you right now.
Impossible to touch, I have never wanted you so much.
There's a couple different things going on in this scene. By having a static shot on them, it kind of feels like you're just crammed in there with them, like you can't really even move. And the sound in this scene is purely diegetic, meaning that what is making noise in the universe is the only thing the audience are hearing. Because of this, it kind of feels like you're in the room with them. By not cutting away at all, it builds up the tension because you see her look at him, you see him looking at her, they never quite look at each other at the same time, and you can kind of tell that they just already want to kiss each other, but are still kind of dancing around it a little bit. And so it's really effective in building that tension up, just because it's the close proximity and that you don't know where this is gonna go, and you don't know when that dam is gonna break, but you just kind of figure it's only a matter of time at this point. Another smart thing that this scene does is that it uses this song to crossfade into a montage of the two of them walking around the city. And the reason why this is effective in just keeping the same song going is that, one, you still kind of feel like you're in the recording booth with them and the transition from diegetic to non-diegetic, but it also carries the emotional momentum of this scene into the montage. So this is where they're at with each other, and so the montage is building on that. And so it just by one shot, just staring straight at the characters, it builds up a ton of intimacy very, very quickly that the rest of the movie is then able to capitalize on. You don't even get the first kiss until I think it's around the half-hour mark when they're on the Ferris wheel, but it's very, very good at building up the tension. Another thing that happens in this scene is that they don't talk. So I'm going to be talking about the acting and the performances quite a bit throughout this video. The most impressive thing about these performances is really just how connected Julie Delpy and Ethan Hawke are with each other. There's a couple of reasons for that, but a very good example is that you can see they're just both so in tune with what the other is doing at any given moment that you buy this connection between the two. And so much of their acting comes from when they're not talking. So the body language, just the uncomfortable, awkward looking that they do, just there's a scene at the end of Before Sunset where you can tell she wants to touch him, but then never quite allows herself to. Now, part of the reason why these performances are so good is that they actually helped write all three scripts. They didn't get writer's credit on Sunrise, but they definitely do have them on Sunset and Midnight. When the film was finally cast, Linklater and Krizan sent the script over. They had the plot down, but they weren't sure about the quality of the love story in there, so they wanted the actors to bring their own personalities and life experiences into it. Example of this from Before Sunset comes from a monologue that Celine has about a weird encounter she had with an American cop while she was living abroad. This is an interaction that reportedly actually happened to Julie Delpy. So some of the monologues are just like what the actors actually think, or like their actual philosophies or stories that actually happened to them. But it's integrated so well into these characters and their outlooks that you don't really question it all that much. In fact, their connection with each other and with the material through the dialogue is so naturalistic that the first time I saw this, I legitimately thought the entire film was just improvised. It has a mumblecore feel to it just because the fact that you're just spending time with these characters and you buy it so much feels so naturalistic that I thought in my mind there was no way they wrote that out beforehand. But that just speaks to the quality of the acting, that it just feels that naturalistic, and the quality of the writing too, just because they spent more time rehearsing these scripts than they actually spent shooting. I think all three movies took a collective maybe 30-ish days to shoot total. That just speaks to how specific and how careful they were with the pre-production process, that it was that effortless. But the smartest thing Linklater does with these films is that he sets the characters up to succeed and then gets out of the way and just lets the actors do their thing. And I think that's a very, very smart approach to these films, especially because you're just talking. These movies could easily have been just the dullest thing to watch, but it's fascinating just because you buy these performances because they're so good and so in tune with each other. One of the big motifs that comes up in this trilogy is the idea of the passage of time. And each of these films has kind of a different way of addressing it, but in Before Sunrise, the night feels very, very long. It feels like it's never gonna end, and just mainly because of how dreamy the entire thing feels, and how kind of abrupt the ending of this film is. You don't quite realize how much time has passed or how little time actually has passed. In fact, this is even kind of lampshaded by Jesse, like when the sun does come up in that movie, Jesse says,
Oh, I don't know. We're back in real time.
I know, I hate that.
Emphasizing the fact that their time is up. The ending of Before Sunrise is very emotionally moving because you expect something else to happen. They're standing at the train station and people start getting on the train pulls in, the conductor is trying to get people on, and they know that they have to either make a choice right then and there to stay or just go on their separate ways. And they come up with a compromise to meet up again in 6 months. But you can see just this panic overtake both characters as they don't quite know how to navigate the situation. And you're expecting some big romantic gesture just because every movie has something like that. Okay, Harry Met Sally has this.
I've been doing a lot of thinking. And the thing is, I love you.
What?
I love you.
Love Actually has this. And this. And this.
Joanna.
It's just very common, even with drama movies, just to have just this big scene at the end. Someone's getting taken away from their wedding. Someone's running through an airport or something. So you're kind of expecting that to happen, and then it doesn't. So these movies at their heart are kind of a battle of idealism and romanticism and the realities of life. In this first movie, they kind of ignore the realities until they can't anymore, at which point, you know, the most realistic thing in that situation happens. After all that, the characters get on a plane and train respectively and go their separate ways. And you're left forever to wonder what happened. Did they meet up in 6 months? Or at least you would have had there not been a second one. We fast forward to 2004 with the release of Before Sunset. The plot of Before Sunset is as follows. It has been 9 years since Jesse and Celine met on that train. They never met up again, and Jesse is now a world-famous author on the last stop of a book tour. The opening scene is he is giving a talk about his book in a little bookshop in Paris. How many times did I just say book there? And he realizes Celine is watching him. The two of them connect and decide to spend the afternoon together before he has to get on his plane back to the US. In the process, they deal with what happened, as the book that he wrote was about their night together. They both discover very quickly that what was between them before is still there. But this time, he decides to stay in Paris. So after the release of Before Sunrise, they almost immediately started talking about doing another one. Not like that these movies made enormous returns. Like, they made their budget back and then a little bit more on top of that, but these movies were not like runaway hits.
But really no one was expecting us to do a second film.
Yeah, our joke is it's the lowest grossing trilogy of all time.
Of all time, yeah, exactly.
Especially when you have giant blockbuster romantic movies like Love Actually was one of the more recent ones comparatively to Before Sunset, or like a giant sweeping epic like Titanic or something like that. No, these movies were never on that level in terms of budget or scope. That said, they all decided to do a sequel, and Richard Linklater initially wanted to do a sequel that was bigger in scope. So the original concept for the sequel would have taken place in multiple different cities around Europe and would have taken place very soon after the events of the first movie. And even if you look at interviews between Linklater, Hawke, Delpy, they all were very, very insistent that the two characters would have kept that meeting that they set up in Sunrise. I don't know exactly what the sequel would have been like had it not been released in the mid-2000s, but it's easy to assume that it would have been about the meeting, what happens from there. This is another example of life imitating art. Life got in the way. So various studios said no to doing a sequel to this movie just because of its poor margins, and Linklater realized very, very quickly he'd had to tone down the scope of the movie in order to get it financed. And so it took them a couple years to come up with the original concept, took them a couple more years to come up with a scaled down concept that would work for everybody. So between having to do other projects and following Ethan Hawke's divorce from actress Uma Thurman, the original creative team got together in 2003 and came up with the sequel idea. And once again, they spent several weeks writing and rehearsing it, and they shot it in less than 2 weeks. I think this one was shot in 9 days. If not, I'll put a silly little caption in this frame telling you guys just how fucking wrong I am. The movie is, at its face value, very similar to the first one in terms of the way that it's presented, so I'm not going to go too deep into some of the technical breakdowns the way I just did with Before Sunrise. It's still very minimalistic. You still only get 2 named characters, with mention of a third, that being Jesse's son. And so once again, you have this effect where, because there's only 2 named characters and only 2 characters with significant amounts of dialogue, the movie kind of just isolates you in the world of just these 2 people and the connection that they share with each other. But this movie has a very different way of presenting it at the same time, despite the fact that it has a very similar stripped-down style. So first and foremost, Linklater returned, Kim Krizan returned to help write the story, Julie Delpy and Ethan Hawke returned to reprise their roles, and they get screenplay credit, as they would with Before Midnight. And cinematographer Lee Daniel would reprise his role as well. So one of the key differences between this movie and Before Sunrise is kind of this dream. It's this perfect romance. It's set up with this battle between the fantasy of what they are living and then the reality of what they know has to happen. So there's always that struggle, that juxtaposition there. It's a very different sort of juxtaposition here. So one of the big themes of this movie is memory. You can even say that Jesse's kind of an author stand-in for Richard Linklater, where he talks about living and being reminded of something in a memory while being at a very different point in his life. Each of the characters have a kind of a tug of war with their own perception of what happened. And it's almost as if the characters themselves aren't even sure that the first movie even happened, or if they're just romanticizing or this one-night stand that they spent with a stranger. Turns out that Jesse's book that he writes is about that one night that they spent together. This is once again another kind of author insert moments, because as we talked about with Before Sunrise, it was inspired by Linklater meeting up with a woman named Amy. We'll get to that. We'll get to the end of that story, unfortunately, in Before Midnight. It does not have a happy ending, but kind of Linklater was kind of secretly hoping to get her attention with that movie so he could reconnect with her, and it turns out that Jesse is kind of doing that with the book. And then Celine later reveals that she reads the book, and she's a little bit off-put because she's not sure about how she's perceived in that book. She's like, was that even me? Or is this just this romanticized ideal of what I was? Was I really this person, or am I just being put on a pedestal? And so this is one of the big themes of the movie, is that, are they romanticizing something, or is this something that actually has a real-life chance of happening? Both characters are in very, very, very different points in their lives than when we last left off. Jesse is now a world-famous author, he's married, he has a kid. And Celine is living in an apartment in Paris. She has a long-term on and off boyfriend, she has a career she's very passionate about. And the 2 of them are very much working professionals. And they are both kind of at odds with whether or not they think their lives are going in the right direction. Jesse feels like he's trapped in a loveless marriage. Celine is worried that the romanticism that she once held as a child and as in her early 20s is gone.
There's been so much water under the bridge. It's not even about you anymore. It's about that time, that moment in time that is forever gone. I don't know.
And she even says that she's not even sure she has the ability to connect intimately with anyone anymore. And so there's this question of, is that connection real between them? Is it still there? And so the movie kind of sets that up as the main conflict. But the movie also pretty much tells you right away that that connection is still real. They didn't imagine it. And because there's discussions about whether or not they're debating whether or not did they actually sleep together in the first movie? Do they even remember these events the same way? Did they perceive them the same way?
We had sex twice, you idiot.
So one of the ways that this movie lets you know that that connection between the 2 of them is still there, it's presented in a very similar way as the first movie, where having the 2 of them primarily just be the only people that interact with each other. And you even see shifts in little ideals that the characters have. So one of the big ideas of Before Sunrise is this idea of death, reincarnation, this afterlife. And it kind of gives the first movie this ethereal, dreamy feeling, the fact that they're talking about these giant philosophical ideas. They're still figuring out who they are. You can definitely see that they're a little bit more cynical, a little bit more muted with these ideals. There's talk about reincarnation in the first one, and in this one, Celine very, very adamantly insists that she no longer believes in reincarnation, doesn't believe in God, ghosts, anything like that, despite it being a huge conversation point in the first one. So the movie kind of gives little indications that, yes, these are the same people, but yes, they've also grown up a little bit more and are more adult. By showing the evolution of these two people as people plays into something that Richard Linklater would do once again with Boyhood after this movie, the idea of people changing over time. Because that's even one of the conversation points in this one, where are they even those same people anymore, or are they just dreams that they had to let go of? But both characters give indication that they want to be those people again, and that what happened in that first movie affected them strongly enough. Celine through her song, Jesse through his book. One of the key differences in the way this movie is presented as opposed to the first one is that this movie is presented as if it were real time. So it's framed as one singular conversation that the two of them have, as opposed to being set over the course of 13 hours. It's far and away the shortest movie of the three at in running time of about 80 minutes. The movie just flies by. You get sucked into the conversation between the two of them because, again, this movie is just one singular conversation. Once again, Linklater wants to put his actors and the characters front and center, and so the movie barely has any cuts even. One of the first scenes in the movie is an 11-minute long tracking shot of the two of them walking through the streets of Paris. And you're so drawn into the conversation and the fact that you keep going through different locations that you don't even notice that there hasn't been a cut in over 10 minutes. The performances, once again, are very naturalistic, very down to earth. They're walking through the streets and then they realize, oh wait, no, I'm going the wrong way. We gotta turn here. And so if you're just kind of lost in conversation with someone, that stuff is bound to happen. One of the ways that they achieved this real-time effect is that they used natural lighting and shot during the day at those times of day, which made the fact that this was shot in only about 2 weeks that much more impressive, because the logistics of that were a nightmare. Especially when you're shooting in golden hour-ish times as we get later and deeper into the movie. Trying to find those times naturally means that you have a very small window to get what you need done. So that speaks to the rehearsal process, that speaks to the pre-pro that they all did, and it's nothing short of impressive. By having mostly natural lighting, by having minimalistic presentation, even less so than the previous movie, is that it presents things in a much more realistic way. Whereas the first movie is presented as this dream that the two of them are having together, this one is presented as the reality of it, and how real life kind of woke them up from that dream. So, as far as that meeting goes, are imitating life. They wanted to make another movie soon after the first one. They couldn't, and so the characters wanted to make that meeting, but they couldn't. It's revealed in dialogue that Jesse actually did fly back to Vienna to try and see her, but Celine's grandmother died a few days before, and the funeral was the day of the meeting, so she was forced to miss it.
Oh no, oh, that's terrible. Oh no, I'm laughing, but I don't mean it. Did you hate me? You must have hated me. Have you been hating me all this time? You have.
No.
And they lost touch. And that's honestly probably the most realistic outcome for an arrangement as wild as that. You see the pain of having lost that connection in the characters' faces. The fact that they're so much less sure of themselves in this movie than they were in the first one. You see that the way that they want to touch each other but can't quite bring themselves to do it, despite because they know that they were once part of each other's lives and kind of aren't again. This movie is like, what do you do if you had another chance with the one that got away? And this movie has some really, really, truly wonderful scenes. So, for example, the musical scene at the very end, where she's just playing the guitar. Fun fact, Julie Delpy actually composed 3 different songs for this movie, so these were all songs that she wrote and performed herself. It's just, once again, it's just shot reverse shot. The movie doesn't want you to focus on inserts, it doesn't want you to focus on the beautiful location, it just wants you to be in this moment with these people, and props to Linklater and cinematographer Lee Daniels for achieving that. Adding to the turbulence of the production going into this movie is that Julie Delpy's team did not want her to make this movie. This movie did not make that much money. It became a cult hit, but it didn't really go beyond that. Her agent was so adamant that she don't do this movie because, in his words, nobody will see it and it won't make any money, that he fired her for doing the movie. Before Sunset very smartly evolves the characters by having them be at very different points in their lives, which is what happens, and how timing is a huge factor in relationships. And they were at the right place at the right time in the first movie, and they're trying to see if they still are here. This one might be my favorite movie of the three, just because of how much it pulls you in despite being way more restrained. The colors are more muted. The entire place takes during real time, during the daytime. The movie is presented as a singular 80-minute conversation, and you just see the beginning and the end of that conversation. And you can very well imagine what happens after this movie. There's very little ambiguity as to where these two are headed next. There's less ambiguity, there's less prettiness with the way it's presented, but that all goes in service of just showing the realism of the characters growing up, but still very much being in love. And the climactic scene in the movie is her playing guitar for him and him just intently listening. And again, it's just shot, reverse shot. And they're not even really talking to each other, despite the fact that their eyes are saying everything you need to understand. So this movie, despite being only dialogue, is very big on show, don't tell. And these characters are starting to feel their mortality a little bit, going in with the whole idea of the passage of time. And do they feel their lives are going in the correct direction? And this movie gives them a crossroads. They either have another shot at this, or they can keep going the way that they have been. Before Midnight picks up once again 9 years after the end of the previous film. This time, Jesse and Celine are a couple. They're not married, but they are together and have 2 children. However, the first scene of the movie is Jesse saying goodbye to his son, with whom he has joint custody with his first wife, the one he was married to in Before Sunset. While we never quite see what happened, we come to understand that his choice to stay with Celine led to a very, very ugly divorce that they are still feeling the consequences of to this day. That said, they do have 2 young daughters that they love very much. The family is on vacation in Greece and staying at the house of their friend and are gifted a hotel room from some other writer friends of theirs. The 2 of them go to this hotel with the intention of spending a romantic night, but the entire thing devolves into a nasty argument that makes them both question the future of their relationship. Now, there's a couple different ways to read the ending, and I'll get into that later, but I kind of lean towards the optimistic side, but I think the creators do too. So once Before Sunset was released, it was released to almost universal acclaim. It made a decent box office numbers, $16 million off of about a $2.3 million budget, more than Before Sunrise made. It was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, with Delpy, Hawke, and Linklater all sharing credits for this time. It did not win, but it was nominated. And once again, the 3 of them went their separate ways to work on other projects. And this is where we get to the end of Linklater's real-life inspiration of this movie. In 2010, a friend of the woman he met that inspired Before Sunrise contacted him after seeing Before Sunrise and informed him that she unfortunately passed away in a car accident just months before the production of Before Sunrise. And this devastated both Linklater and Hawke. Like I said, it's an unfortunate story. In 2011, Delpy, Hawke, and Linklater once again got together and started passing around ideas for scripts. By this time, all 3 main creatives in this picture all had kids by this point, and so they decided, because they were at a different point in their lives, they wanted to show where Jesse and Celine would be. This is why these movies are talked about this way, is because there's an authenticity to this relationship that few pieces of media are able to truly showcase. This movie is really why I'm even talking about all 3 the way that I am, and we'll get to the bigger thematic picture in a minute. One of the unique things about this movie is that it's the most movie-like out of the bunch, whereas the first 2 are very much just the 2 characters walking around Vienna or Paris and just talking to each other, essentially. The choice was made to not have them be alone together as characters for almost an hour into the movie. The first thing you see is Jesse and his son from his first marriage, and him dealing with the fallout of that marriage ending. You see them with their daughters, you see them with their friends. This dinner party scene is very interesting because, and this was a very deliberate choice, you have several different couples being presented. You have this young, idealistic couple that kind of shows where Jesse and Celine were in the first movie. You have a second couple that's right around their age that are used as a kind of a mirror for them. Their relationship is still going well while things are starting to fray between the 2 of them. And then you have 2 of their older friends, one of whom had a husband pass away and the other of whom his partner just isn't there that day. And they're both very, very happy where things are. And so you kind of see where they were, where they could go. And this juxtaposition between them and the other couples during this dinner party scene highlights this tension that is starting to build up. Celine is no longer passionate about her career. She's more than a little bit jaded. She doesn't like that she's being forced to choose between her career or her kids, or at least that's how she feels about the situation. Jesse doesn't like that he has a child that lives in the US while he lives in France, and he feels like he's failing as a father. His dilemma is, does he choose his son, or does he choose Celine and the rest of his family? You understand the dilemmas that both of these characters are facing, which is kind of helps the authenticity of where these fights are coming from. One of the impressive things about this movie is that it's just kind of about the consequences of their past actions and the choices that they made and how they have to work through them. In an interview, Ethan Hawke described the first film in this trilogy as a movie about what might be. He said Before Sunrise is a film about what should be, and Before Midnight is a film about what is, as you see this relationship really get put to the test. One of the things that sets this movie apart, Before Sunset is Will They, Won't They, Before Sunrise is in the same vein, and this one, they're in an established relationship, and it's not will they get together, but can they make it work together. And the prominence of other characters does a couple of things. It shows how, by starting a family together, their world is expanding, and it also shows the fact that they're starting to drift apart, just because Jesse's son is beginning to feel like more of a priority, and how she feels like she's being shoved into this role of domestic mother that she doesn't quite feel like she ever wanted. And they're very much dealing with their age at the moment. They're no longer those idealistic kids from their 20s. They're no longer unsure about what their lives are going to be in their 30s. By this point, they're in their 40s, and their lives are what they are, and they have to either deal with it or move on. And so the fact that they spend so much of this movie apart kind of introduces this tension that slowly builds, and by the time they get to this hotel room scene, and it feels like we're about to get some of that romance from those first two movies, and it just turns into this giant ugly fight. Once again, very little of this movie was improvised, super well rehearsed, super well acted, and the connection is still there between the two actors. It just hurts so much because you have spent so much time investing into these characters and this relationship. It's just devastating to watch this relationship almost fall apart, and you think it's going to end. So speaking of endings, let's talk about that. You get Ethan Hawke bringing up a kind of a callback to the first movie where he's talking about his time traveler character that convinced her to get off the train with him in the first place. This choice does a couple of things. It, one, reminds the viewers and Celine of why there was initially an attraction between them to begin with. And it also kind of suggests that despite the fact that they just had this huge, ugly fight in which they both revealed that they cheated on each other at previous points in their marriage or relationship, that they can still commit and still make it work, despite the fact that they have grown up. They're not those same kids anymore. They realize the connection isn't just this automatic thing. This relationship is something that they have to actively choose to work for and fight for as they get older. The entire thesis of the movie can be summed up in this one quote from Jesse.
But if you want true love, then this is it. This is real life. It's not perfect, but it's real. And if you can't see it, then you're blind, all right?
So what this movie does is it retroactively turns the entire trilogy into a series of movies about people growing up and how love changes as you get older. As opposed to one just being kind of a fantasy and one being about the one that got away. It's about you are growing with these people and these characters. And there's a certain sophistication to the way and how simplistically this entire thing is presented that it just makes the entire trilogy that much more endearing. The naturalism of the dialogue and the minimalistic filming choices help ground the viewer into the world of the story. It creates a very immediate connection with you and these characters, and because you have experienced so many intimate moments together, seeing it fall apart is just kind of the most heartrending thing ever. But I choose to think that once they come to understand that this is something that they have to actively keep working towards and maintaining, despite the fact that they have so much else going on. It's not just about them anymore. It's about their kids, their friends, their work, the fact that divorces and infidelity on both ends have complicated matters quite a bit, and there's conflicts about whether they're going to move closer to be with his son or whether he's going to stay in France and potentially miss out on the best years of his son's life. A lot of these conflicts don't get resolved. They're still there. They still have to make those choices. And so they understand that that will always be a factor in their relationship, but it is something that they still want to actively fight for. And I'm gonna make myself cry. I'm gonna go cry into a pint of ice cream after this. And so that's one of the things I think sets these movies, aside from most romance movies, is that they don't have this kind of development of the relationship. You mostly just get will they, won't they stories, and then this implied happily ever after. You get this big romantic moment, and then you never see, like, the day-to-day reality, the day-to-day mundanity of it, and just these choices that they have to make that will have consequences down the road. That's not to say that other romance movies like Gone with the Wind or Titanic or something, or like Love Actually or like that, are bad. Far from it. It's just love is presented in a much more grounded, less cinematic way, and I think that makes it stronger than most romantic stories just because it feels more true to life. It feels more honest about what romance is, and it doesn't give this false idea of what love is or what it could be. It shows you the magic of falling in love for the first time, the feeling of elation you have when you find the right person to connect with, and then it shows you the reality of this is not always going to be easy, nor should it be. And that is why I chose these movies as my Criterion Month project, because I think they're some of the most honest movies ever made. Over 9 years have passed since the ending of Before Midnight. Like Before Sunset, this one was released to universal acclaim. It made $23 million off of about a $3 million budget, I think. And once again, it was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. Fun fact about that year, it was the only movie nominated in that category to not get nominated for Best Picture. Go figure. Despite coming out in 2013, we are now in the year 2022, and as you might have noticed, there is no fourth Before movie. None of the creatives associated with these projects have stated that it's definitively over, but Julie Delpy did say that there was talks about doing a fourth one and that they just couldn't agree on a story, and so they shelved it. Will they come back again later? I have no idea. It depends on whether or not they feel like they have stories to tell, and that's one of the things I respect. It's the same core group of people making these movies each time. Linklater directed all three, Hawke and Delpy starred in all three, Kim Krizan helped write the story for all three, and you feel this continuity throughout these movies. And so because it's the same creative team and the same united vision that they have is what sets these movies apart so much from other trilogies. Even in some other trilogies with that same kind of continuity behind the camera, so like the Nolan's Batman movies, there's still a marked difference in quality between the second one and the third one. Now, is comparing a movie with something as the stature of The Dark Knight always going to be fair, or The Godfather Part 2 always a fair thing to do? No. But what I am saying is that it makes it that much more impressive that each of these movies were as good as they are and had something different to say each time. And why they all get green lights and they are all very much worth watching, rewatching. Honestly, I can see myself watching these things once a year. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't noticed, I tried to pair up an album that was released each year of the movie in the background. Although Good Kid, Mad City was 2012. I mean, it's the deluxe edition of Good Kid, Mad City, which was released in 2013. I tried. Thanks for bearing with me to the end on this one, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. This was kind of a tough video to make just because of logistical challenges on my end, and I hope that you guys enjoyed what I have to say. And once again, I'm sorry I didn't get my review of Everything Everywhere All at Once out in time. Once again, that movie's a green light, and I hope you guys enjoy that. What are some of your favorite love stories? Have you seen these movies? Which one of these movies is your favorite if you have seen them? If you haven't seen them, what are you doing? I just spent an hour breaking these movies down and spoiling the hell out of them. Go watch them. Stop watching me, watch them. Like, comment, subscribe. We have other good stuff coming down the pipeline. And welcome back to Full Stop Reviews. Another technique that Linklater. So another cinematographic, goddamn.
Oh, so you know like a lot about cinnamon top
Cinnamon Toast Crunch? I do.